He was a titan of industry, a man who measured his life in stock prices and acquisitions. Jonathan Davenport had it all: a billion-dollar inheritance, a name that opened any door, and a future forged in cold, hard steel. But 3 years ago, he made a decision that cost him everything that truly mattered. He walked away from his pregnant fiancée, convinced by a lie that shattered 3 lives. Tonight, at the most exclusive charity gala of the year, he's about to come face to face with the woman he erased from his life. But she isn't the broken girl he left behind, and the child standing beside her will unravel his entire world. The rain that fell on New York City on that October evening was relentless, a cold, driving sheet that mirrored the storm brewing inside the Davenport penthouse on Park Avenue. From 60 stories up, the city lights blurred into a glittering tapestry of indifference. Inside, the silence was a weapon, wielded with surgical precision by the patriarch, Gregory Davenport. He sat in a leather wingback chair that looked more like a throne, a glass of amber liquid swirling in his hand. His face, a roadmap of ruthless business deals and boardroom battles, was set in stone. Across from him, his son Jonathan Davenport stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his own reflection a pale imitation of the man in the chair. At 28, Jonathan was the heir apparent to Davenport Industries, a global logistics empire. He had his father's sharp jawline and piercing blue eyes, but tonight they held a flicker of defiance his father was determined to extinguish. Between them, on a polished mahogany table, lay a single, damning photograph. It was of Rosemary Flynn, Jonathan's fiancée, laughing with another man at an outdoor cafe. It was innocent, a candid moment, but in the hands of Gregory Davenport, it had been twisted into a tool of destruction. "She's making a fool of you, son." Gregory's voice was a low rumble, devoid of warmth. "A Flynn from Queens, a gardener. Her father was a union plumber. Do you understand the whispers? They say she's a gold digger, a common vine trying to choke a mighty oak. And now, this," he gestured to the photo, "proof of her character, or lack thereof." "It's a picture, Dad," Jonathan said, his voice tight. "Her friend from college was in town. She told me about it." "Did she?" Gregory leaned forward, the ice in his glass clinking like a tiny bell of doom. "Did she also tell you she's been seeing a Dr. Albie Finch? Privately? We ran a check. He's an obstetrician. But here's the interesting part." He slid a second document across the table, a preliminary paternity report. The font was stark, the conclusion brutal. Probability of paternity, 0%. Jonathan stared at the paper, the world tilting on its axis. The words swam before his eyes. He felt the air leave his lungs, replaced by a cold, hollowing dread. Rosie was pregnant. She had told him 2 weeks ago, her eyes shining with tears of joy, her hands trembling as she held up the positive test. He had been ecstatic, lifting her into his arms, imagining a life beyond balance sheets and board meetings, a life with her, with their child. Now that beautiful image was shattering. "The dates don't add up, Jonathan," Gregory pressed, his voice softening into a mock-sympathetic tone. "She tells you she's pregnant, and our sources confirm she was seeing this doctor weeks before? She tried to pass another man's child off as a Davenport heir, to secure her position, to secure our fortune." Jonathan's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and betrayal. He thought of Rosie's goodness, her gentle hands that could coax life from dormant soil, the way she laughed with her whole body, the quiet strength in her hazel eyes. It couldn't be true, but his father was relentless. Gregory had spent Jonathan's entire life molding him, teaching him that trust was a liability and emotion was a weakness. He had groomed Jonathan to see the world as a chessboard of assets and threats, and Rosie in his father's eyes had always been a threat. "This is a lie," Jonathan whispered, more to himself than to his father. "Is it?" Gregory stood and walked over to his son, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Or is it the truth you've been refusing to see? The world we live in isn't a fairy tale. People want what we have. They will lie, cheat, and deceive to get it. You are my son. You are a Davenport. You will not be brought down by a manipulative girl from the outer boroughs." The words, poisoned with years of conditioning, found their mark. Doubt, a seed planted by his father long ago, began to sprout, its thorny vines wrapping around his heart. He thought of the photo again, of the name of a doctor he didn't recognize, of the cold, hard science on the paper in front of him. His father had never been wrong about business. Why would he be wrong about this? The next evening, he met Rosemary at their favorite Italian restaurant in the village. A cozy place with checkered tablecloths and dripping wax candles. It was where he'd first told her he loved her. Tonight, it would be the place he destroyed her. She was already there, a radiant smile on her face. She was wearing the simple green dress he loved, her auburn hair catching the candlelight. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach as he approached. "I was just telling our little bean about its father," she said, her voice a happy hum, "that he has the kindest eyes and the most ridiculous obsession with spreadsheets." Jonathan didn't smile. He sat down, the weight of his father's words pressing on him like a physical force. He couldn't meet her eyes. "Rosie," he began, his voice a cold, unfamiliar thing. "We need to talk." The light in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "Okay. Is everything all right, Johnny? You seem distant." He had rehearsed this. His father had helped him craft the words. Clean, efficient, and final, like severing a bad investment. "This isn't working," he said, the phrase tasting like ash in his mouth. "Us. This engagement." Rosemary stared at him, her smile gone completely. "What are you talking about? We're having a baby. We're getting married in the spring." "No," Jonathan said, finally forcing himself to look at her. He hardened his expression, channeling his father. "We're not. The wedding is off." Her face crumpled. "Why? What happened? Was it your father again?" "Johnny, we can talk this through. Whatever it is, we can fix it." "There's nothing to fix," he said, the lie searing his tongue. He had to make her believe it, had to make a clean break. He couldn't tell her about the report. His father had forbidden it, calling it a private family matter not to be debated with an outsider. He had to use a different cruelty. "I've thought about it, about our lives. They're too different. My world, it's not for you. This was a mistake." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling onto her cheeks. "A mistake? Loving me was a mistake. Our baby is a mistake." Her voice was a raw whisper of disbelief and pain. "The situation has changed," he said, the corporate jargon sounding obscene in this intimate space. "I'll make sure you're taken care of course, financially. There will be a generous settlement." That was the final blow, the suggestion that she could be bought off. Her devastation morphed into a flash of fierce, wounded pride. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Every head in the small restaurant turned to look. "A settlement?" she repeated, her voice trembling with a rage born of pure heartbreak. "You think you can pay me for my love? For our child? You coward!" She pulled the antique sapphire engagement ring from her finger, his grandmother's ring, and threw it on the table. It clattered against a bread plate before settling, its sparkle a mockery of their broken promise. "Keep your money, Jonathan," she spat, her face pale but her gaze steady and filled with a fire he had never seen before. "I don't want it. I don't want anything from you. Ever." She turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving him alone in the candlelight with the ghost of their future. He watched her go, a part of him screaming to run after her, to tell her the truth, to tear up the damnable report and believe in her over his father. But the other part, the Davenport part, sat frozen in his chair, telling him he had just averted a disaster. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Rosemary Flynn disappeared. She moved out of her small Queens apartment within a week. Her phone number was disconnected. She left no forwarding address. For Jonathan, it was confirmation of her guilt. She had been exposed and had run. He threw himself into his work, sealed the memory of her away in a cold, dark vault in his mind, and allowed his father to guide him. Within a year, he was engaged again, this time to Genevieve Monroe, the daughter of a rival CEO. It was a merger, not a marriage. It was safe. It was sensible. It was utterly, profoundly empty. He was a millionaire who had everything and nothing at all. 3 years passed in a blur of private jets, quarterly reports, and sterile boardrooms. Jonathan Davenport, now Chief Operating Officer of Davenport Industries, moved through life with a detached efficiency that had earned him the nickname the Shark on Wall Street. He and Genevieve Monroe were the city's power couple, their faces gracing the pages of business magazines and society columns. Their life was a meticulously curated performance of success. The wedding was set for the following spring, a grand affair designed to solidify the alliance between two corporate dynasties. Jonathan was living the life his father had designed for him. He was miserable. The annual Children's Health Foundation Gala was the pinnacle of New York's philanthropic season. Held in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, it was a sea of haute couture, legacy jewels, and the quiet clinking of champagne flutes. Davenport Industries was a primary sponsor, and Jonathan was there to represent the family name, Genevieve clinging to his arm like an expensive accessory. "Darling, isn't that Senator Thompson over there?" Genevieve whispered, her eyes scanning the room for opportune connections. "We should go say hello. His committee oversees maritime shipping." "In a moment, Genevieve," Jonathan said, his voice flat. He felt a familiar sense of suffocation, the gilded cage of his life pressing in on him. He nodded at business associates, shook hands, and smiled a smile that never reached his eyes. It was all a game, and he was tired of playing. The lights dimmed, and the foundation's president, a stately older woman, took the stage. "Good evening, everyone, and thank you for your incredible generosity. This year, we are thrilled to honor a new and transformative force in community wellness. This individual has, in less than 3 years, created an organization that has touched thousands of lives, building therapeutic gardens in children's hospitals, community centers, and shelters across the tri-state area." Jonathan only half listened, his mind on an upcoming merger negotiation in Singapore. Her work is a testament to the idea that healing can grow from the ground up, that hope can be nurtured like a fragile seed, the president continued. She turned personal adversity into a powerful mission, founding her nonprofit with nothing but her own savings and an unbreakable spirit. It is my profound honor to introduce the founder of the Verdant Hope Initiative, Ms. Rosemary Flynn. The name hit Jonathan like a physical blow. Rosemary Flynn. It couldn't be. He looked up at the stage, his heart hammering against his ribs. Walking into the spotlight was a woman he recognized and yet didn't. The gentle, slightly shy girl he had known was gone. This woman was poised, her confidence radiating from her like a quiet energy. She wore an elegant deep blue gown that complemented her auburn hair, which was swept up in a sophisticated style. She was more beautiful than he remembered, a beauty that was now shaped by a strength and self-possession he had never seen. It was Rosie, his Rosie. A polite applause filled the room. Jonathan was frozen, his champagne flute stalled halfway to his lips. Genevieve glanced at him, a flicker of irritation in her eyes. "Jonathan? What is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." He had. He was seeing the ghost of the life he had thrown away. Rosie stepped up to the podium, her hazel eyes sweeping across the sea of wealthy patrons. Her gaze was calm, her presence commanding. "Thank you," she began, her voice clear and steady, amplified by the ballroom sound system. It was the same voice that had once whispered his name in the dark, but now it held a different timbre, one of authority and purpose. 3 years ago, my life fell apart. I found myself alone, pregnant, and with no clear path forward. I learned then that life doesn't always give you solid ground to stand on. Sometimes the floor gives way, and you are left with nothing but the soil beneath. Jonathan felt every word like a shard of ice in his veins. He could feel Genevieve's stare, his father's stare from across the room where he sat with other board members. He couldn't look at them. He couldn't look away from Rosie. "But in that soil," Rosie continued, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips, "I found my purpose. I remembered what my grandmother taught me as a little girl, that to plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow. I wanted to give that belief to children who were fighting for their own tomorrows. Children in hospital beds, children who had lost their homes. And so, Verdant Hope was born." She spoke about her work, about the rooftop garden at a pediatric cancer ward, about the sensory garden at a school for autistic children. She spoke with a passion that was so pure, so real, it made everything else in the room, the diamonds, the power plays, the empty chatter, feel cheap and insignificant. She had taken the worst moment of her life, the moment he had created, and transformed it into something beautiful and life-affirming. The shock of seeing her was already a jolt to his system, but the real earthquake was yet to come. As her speech concluded to a standing ovation, Rosie's eyes scanned the crowd, a grateful smile on her face. Her gaze briefly, impersonally, passed over him, with no flicker of recognition. It was worse than hatred, it was indifference. Then her eyes found someone at the side of the stage. Her expression softened instantly, melting into a look of pure, unadulterated love. A small boy, no older than 2 or 3, ran out from the wings and into her open arms. He was dressed in a tiny tuxedo, his untamable brown hair sticking up in a way that was achingly familiar. Rosie lifted him onto her hip, kissing his cheek. The boy laughed, a joyful sound that seemed to silence the entire vast room for Jonathan. The boy turned his head, looking out at the audience with wide, curious eyes. And Jonathan Davenport's world stopped. The boy had his hair. He had the distinct shape of his jaw. But most of all, he had his eyes. Not just the color, that same piercing Davenport blue, but the exact shape, the same intensity. It was like looking at a photograph of himself as a child. Genevieve gasped beside him. "My God, Jonathan, Jonathan couldn't breathe. The paternity report. 0 and 0%. The lies his father had fed him. She tried to pass another man's child off as a Davenport heir. It was all a lie. A catastrophic, life-altering lie. That was his son. His son. He had a son. A son he had abandoned before he was even born. A son who was being raised by the incredible woman he had shattered and thrown away. The room began to spin. The polite applause, the clinking glasses, the swell of the orchestra, it all faded into a deafening roar in his ears. He saw his father, Gregory, across the room, his face a mask of cold fury, his eyes boring into Jonathan's, sending a clear, silent message. Do nothing. Say nothing. But for the first time in his life, Jonathan didn't care what his father wanted. He shoved his champagne flute into Genevieve's hand, muttering, "I have to go," and pushed his way through the stunned crowd. He stumbled out of the ballroom, past the pharaoh's tomb and the Greek sculptures, their ancient eyes seeming to judge him. He burst through the museum's main doors and into the cool night air, gasping for breath. The image of the boy's face burned into his mind. His son. His name was probably Leo, or Sam, or something wonderful that Rosie had picked out. He would be turning 3 soon. He probably liked dinosaurs and building blocks. He had a mother who was a hero, and he had a father who was a monster. The weight of his sin, of his gullibility and cruelty, crashed down on him with the force of a tidal wave. The shark was drowning. The days that followed the gala were a waking nightmare for Jonathan. Sleep offered no escape, his dreams filled with the image of a small boy with his eyes and a woman whose strength shamed him. He was a ghost in his own life. At a tense Davenport Industries board meeting, he stared blankly at profit and loss statements, the numbers blurring into the face of his son. The Singapore merger, once the focus of his entire world, now seemed like a foolish, insignificant game. "Jonathan, are you with us?" His father's sharp voice cut through the fog. "The delegation from Tanita Corp arrives Thursday. You are leading the presentation." Jonathan looked at his father, truly looked at him, for the first time seeing not a powerful mentor, but a master manipulator, the architect of his ruin. "I can't," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Postpone it." A stunned silence fell over the boardroom. Jonathan Davenport did not postpone. He conquered. Gregory's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "We'll discuss this later." The first casualty of his new obsession was Genevieve. She found him in his home office late one night, surrounded by printouts from the Verdant Hope Initiative's website. Photos of Rosie laughing as she worked in a garden with a group of children. Photos of his son, she had named him Leo, patting soil into a pot. Leo Flynn, not Davenport. The name was a constant, stabbing reminder of what he had lost, what he had thrown away. "What is this, Jonathan?" Genevieve demanded, her voice laced with accusation. "You've been a zombie since that night. You're jeopardizing the Tanita deal. You're jeopardizing us." "This was never about us, Genevieve," he said, his back to her. "This was a contract, and I think I want to terminate it." "Because of her?" she scoffed. "The gardener? Don't be a fool. Your father was right to get her out of your life. She would have been an anchor dragging you down." Jonathan spun around, his eyes blazing with a fury she had never seen. "My father? He told you about it." Genevieve faltered, realizing her misstep. He mentioned his concerns, that's all. That she wasn't trustworthy." The pieces were clicking into place, forming a hideous picture. "Did you know, Genevieve? Did you know he lied to me?" "Lied! He was protecting you," she retorted, her voice rising. "Protecting the family, protecting our future." Her words were a confession. She knew. She had been complicit in the lie, at least by her silence. He looked at this woman, his fiancée, and felt nothing but revulsion. "Get out," he said, his voice lethally low. "Jonathan, don't do this. Get out." He called the one person he knew he could trust, a man who had been his friend long before the Davenport fortune had shaped him into a weapon. Finn O'Connell was a brilliant, scrappy litigator who had built his own firm from the ground up, a man who saw the world in terms of justice, not profit. They met at a dark, quiet bar downtown, far from the prying eyes of their world. Jonathan laid out the whole story: the relationship with Rosie, the pregnancy, his father's interference, the faked report, the gala, and the soul-crushing sight of Leo. Finn listened patiently, nursing a beer, his expression growing more grim with every word. "Jesus, Johnny," he said when Jonathan finished, his Irish brogue thickening with emotion. "He didn't just lie to you. He detonated your life, and you let him." "I know," Jonathan said, his voice hoarse. "I was a coward. I was weak. I believed him because it was easier than fighting him. But I have to fix it, Finn. I have to try." "Fixing it starts with the truth," Finn said, his lawyer brain kicking into gear. "All of it. We need proof. The paternity report he showed you, do you have a copy?" "No, I never even thought to keep it." "Of course not. He wouldn't let you. It was probably a forgery, created by his own people." "Dr. Albie Finch, you said? The obstetrician? We start there, and we need to find out who took that photo he used against her." Finn leaned forward, his eyes intense. "This is going to be ugly, Johnny. You're going up against Gregory Davenport. He doesn't lose." "I've already lost everything that matters," Jonathan replied. "I have nothing left to lose." His first attempt to contact Rosie was a disaster. He found the address for the Verdant Hope Initiative, a modest but beautifully kept brownstone in Brooklyn that served as its headquarters. He waited outside for her to emerge, his heart pounding like a drum. When she finally walked out, laughing with a colleague, she stopped dead when she saw him. The warmth vanished from her face, replaced by a wall of ice. "Rosie," he started, taking a step forward. "Don't," she said, her voice sharp and cold. She held up a hand. "There is nothing you have to say to me, Mr. Davenport." Mr. Davenport. The name was a blade. "Please," he begged, his voice cracking. 5 minutes. I saw you. At the gala. I saw him." A flicker of fear crossed her face, quickly replaced by fierce protectiveness. "Leo has nothing to do with you. You made that perfectly clear 3 years ago." "I was wrong. I was lied to, Rosie. Deceived." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Is that what you're telling yourself now, to sleep at night? That you were a victim?" "You made your choice, Jonathan. You chose your father and your money over me and your own child. You looked me in the eye and told me our love was a mistake. Don't you dare try to rewrite that now. Stay away from me, and stay away from my son." She turned and walked away without a backward glance, leaving him standing on the pavement, her words echoing in the space between them. He had expected anger, but he had not been prepared for the sheer, impenetrable finality in her voice. The hope he'd harbored withered. Meanwhile, Finn's investigation began to bear fruit, dark and rotten. Dr. Albie Finch's practice had mysteriously closed down 2 years ago. Finn's investigator tracked him to a lavish retirement community in Florida, one far beyond the means of a simple obstetrician. A deep dive into his financials revealed a one-time consulting payment of $250,000 from a shell corporation that Finn traced back to Davenport Industries, dated 1 week after Jonathan and Rosie's breakup. The next piece came from a disgruntled former employee in Gregory's security detail. For a price, he was willing to talk. He confirmed that he had been ordered to tail Rosemary Flynn 3 years ago. The man she was photographed with was her openly gay best friend from design school. The photos were intentionally framed to look intimate. The operative who took them was Genevieve Monroe's cousin, a freelance photographer. The conspiracy was deeper and more venomous than Jonathan had imagined. It wasn't just his father. Genevieve had been an active participant. Her jealousy and ambition had aligned perfectly with Gregory's snobbery and control. They had worked in concert to surgically remove Rosie from his life. The final, most damning piece of evidence came from a source Jonathan never expected. One evening, there was a knock on his apartment door. It was Mrs. Gable, his father's personal assistant for over 30 years, a quiet, unassuming woman who had been a fixture in his life since childhood. She looked terrified, clutching a data stick in her trembling hand. "Mr. Jonathan," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously down the hallway. I can't live with it anymore. What he did to that poor girl." She had been the one to print the forged paternity report on Gregory's private office printer. She had overheard the phone calls with Dr. Finch. She had watched as Gregory and Genevieve celebrated their victory after Jonathan ended the engagement. Her conscience had been eating away at her for 3 years, and seeing Rosie's speech at the gala was the final straw. "It's all on here," she said, pushing the data stick into his hand. "Copies of the emails between your father and Dr. Finch, the wire transfer confirmations, a recording of a phone call he made to Genevieve where they discussed the plan." "I'm so sorry, Jonathan. I was too afraid to speak up." Jonathan took the stick, his hand shaking. "You are the bravest person I know, Mrs. Gable. Thank you." He now held the truth in his hand, a truth so toxic it could destroy his family, his company, and the last vestiges of the man he once was. But it was also the only key that could ever unlock the door to a future he so desperately wanted, a future with his son. He now had the ammunition. The only question was where and when to fire the shot. The perfect opportunity for the reckoning presented itself with an almost poetic irony. In a desperate attempt to control the narrative and pull Jonathan back into the fold, Gregory Davenport had orchestrated a press conference. The announcement, a major philanthropic partnership between Davenport Industries and the Verdant Hope Initiative. It was a brilliant, ruthless move. By publicly aligning with Rosie's nonprofit, Gregory could portray the Davenports as benevolent patrons, while simultaneously forcing Jonathan and Rosie into a professional relationship he could monitor and manipulate. He had even managed to coerce Rosie's board into accepting, framing the multi-million-dollar donation as an offer they couldn't refuse for the sake of the children they served. The press conference was held in the glass-walled atrium of the new Davenport Tower. A podium stood before a backdrop of the two logos, side by side, the cold, sharp angles of the Davenport D and the gentle, leaf-like V of Verdant Hope. The room was packed with journalists, industry leaders, and board members from both organizations. Jonathan arrived just as his father was taking the stage. He saw Rosie standing to the side, her expression professional but strained. She looked trapped. Their eyes met for a fleeting second across the crowded room, and in hers he saw not just coldness, but a flicker of despair. He knew she felt cornered, forced into the lion's den for the sake of her mission. That look solidified his resolve. This was not just about his redemption anymore. It was about her liberation. Gregory began his speech, his voice smooth and commanding. "Today marks a proud new chapter for Davenport Industries, a partnership built on a shared belief in community, in growth, and in the future of our children." Jonathan moved quietly through the crowd, Finn at his side. He nodded to the AV technician, a man Finn's team had already spoken with. "And so it is with great pride that we commit $10 million to the incredible work being done by the Verdant Hope Initiative, led by the visionary Ms. Rosemary Flynn." As applause filled the room, Gregory motioned for Rosie to join him at the podium. This was the moment Jonathan had been waiting for. He stepped forward, taking the second microphone. "Thank you, Father," Jonathan said, his voice ringing through the atrium, cutting off the applause. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Gregory's smile tightened, his eyes flashing with fury. "My father speaks of a belief in community and in children," Jonathan continued, his gaze finding Rosie's. "But I'm here today to talk about the truth. Because philanthropy without truth is just a performance." He turned his attention to Gregory. 3 years ago, this man, my father, Gregory Davenport, along with my then fiancée, Genevieve Monroe, orchestrated a despicable lie to destroy my relationship with the woman I loved, Rosemary Flynn, who was pregnant with my child. Gasps echoed through the atrium. The journalists began scribbling furiously, their cameras flashing. Genevieve, standing in the front row, went pale. "They hired a photographer to create misleading photos," Jonathan announced, his voice gaining strength. "They bribed a Dr. Albie Finch, to forge a paternity report stating I was not the father of my own son, a son I now know is named Leo." He looked directly at Rosie, his heart in his eyes. "A son who has his mother's strength and, God help him, his father's eyes." Gregory stepped forward, his face purple with rage. "Jonathan, this is not the time or the place. You are overwrought." "This is the only time and the only place," Jonathan shot back. He nodded to the AV technician. "I have proof." Suddenly, the large screens behind the podium, which had been displaying the company logos, flickered to life. An email appeared, its header clear for all to see. From G. Davenport, davenportin.com to afinchmdimail.com. Subject, the Flynn matter. The text detailed the plan, the payment, the need for an indisputable result. Next, a wire transfer confirmation for $250,000 from a Davenport shell company to Dr. Finch flashed on the screen. And then came the audio. Gregory's voice, cold and precise, filled the silent room. It was the recording from Mrs. Gable's data stick, a call between him and Genevieve. Gregory's voice, "It's done. He believes it. He's ending it tonight." Genevieve's voice, "Thank God. Did he fight you on it?" Gregory's voice, "He's my son. He knows who to trust. The gardener will be gone by the end of the week. Now our families can proceed as planned." The recording ended. The silence in the atrium was absolute, broken only by a single, sharp sob from Genevieve. The entire edifice of the Davenport dynasty, built on a reputation of strength and integrity, had crumbled in less than 5 minutes. Jonathan looked at his father, a man now diminished, exposed, and pathetic. "The $10 million donation stands," Jonathan said into the microphone, his voice resonating with newfound authority. "But it will not be from Davenport Industries. It will be the first installment from a new foundation I am establishing, funded by my personal liquidation of my shares in this company. A foundation dedicated to funding organizations that operate with the integrity and truth this one so desperately lacks." He then turned to Rosie, who was staring at him, her face a mask of shock, hurt, and dawning understanding. The wall of ice had shattered, and behind it was the raw, 3-year-old wound he had inflicted. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks. "Rosie," he said, his voice now soft, meant only for her, "I can never apologize enough for my weakness, for my cruelty, for the pain I caused you. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. My only hope is that one day you'll let me try to earn the forgiveness of my son." He dropped the microphone, turned his back on the ruins of his former life, and walked off the stage. The press erupted into a frenzy, swarming Gregory and a hysterical Genevieve. But Jonathan only had eyes for the exit, seeking not an escape, but simply air to breathe. He didn't get far. In the hallway, a hand touched his arm. He turned to see Rosie standing there, her face tear-streaked, but her gaze clear. "Everything you said," she whispered. "Was it all true? The report? The photos?" "Every word," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "I was a fool, Rosie, a puppet, and I am so, so sorry." She searched his face, looking for the young man she had loved, and seeing instead a man broken and remade by his own devastating mistake. She didn't offer forgiveness. She didn't offer an embrace. She simply nodded, a slow, thoughtful gesture. "Leo's in the daycare center upstairs," she said quietly. "He likes to play with the blue blocks." It wasn't absolution, it wasn't a promise, but it was a door, cracked open just enough for a sliver of light to get through. For the first time in 3 years, Jonathan Davenport felt a glimmer of hope. The hard part, the reckoning, was over. The harder part, the rebuilding, was just beginning. The sound of children's laughter and the clatter of wooden blocks echoed from the daycare center on the top floor of the Davenport Tower. A space Jonathan had only ever known as a line item on a corporate social responsibility budget. Now it felt like the most intimidating boardroom he had ever approached. He stood outside the glass door, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Through the cheerful decals of cartoon animals, he could see him. Leo. He was sitting in the middle of a colorful rug, meticulously stacking blue blocks into a wobbly tower. He had a look of intense concentration on his face, his brow furrowed in a way that was so familiar it made Jonathan's breath catch in his throat. It was the same expression Jonathan wore when analyzing a complex market trend. This tiny human was a part of him. Taking a deep, unsteadying breath, he pushed the door open. A caregiver looked up and smiled, but Jonathan's eyes were locked on the boy. He walked slowly, cautiously, as if approaching a rare and timid creature, and knelt a few feet away from the rug. Leo looked up, his blue eyes wide and inquisitive. He was not afraid, just curious about the tall man in the suit. He clutched a block in his small hand. "Hello," Jonathan said, his voice barely a whisper. He didn't know what to say. "I'm your father. I'm sorry I'm 3 years late." The words were impossible. Leo just stared, then turned his attention back to his tower, placing another blue block on top with a soft thunk. Jonathan just watched him, a universe of regret and love swirling inside him. He had missed everything. His first steps, his first words, his first wobbly tower of blocks. A shadow fell over him, and he looked up to see Rosie. She stood with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She had composed herself after the chaos of the press conference, but the storm was still visible in her eyes. "He doesn't know you," she said, her voice quiet but not unkind. It was a statement of fact. "To him, you're just a stranger." "I know," Jonathan said, his gaze returning to Leo. How do we start?" Rosie was silent for a long moment, watching the man she once loved and the child she had raised alone. "You start with showing up," she said finally. "Consistently, without expectation. You start by being here. Saturday, at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, 10 a.m. We go there every week. Don't be late." She knelt and scooped Leo into her arms, and the boy chattered happily to her, his tower forgotten. As she walked away, Leo looked over her shoulder at Jonathan, his blue eyes holding a lingering, simple curiosity. That first Saturday was the most awkward day of Jonathan's life. He, who could command a room of 1,000 investors, felt utterly powerless. He had shed his bespoke suit for jeans and a simple sweater, feeling like he was in a costume. He brought an absurdly large, expensive toy truck, which Leo ignored in favor of a smooth gray stone he found in a path. Rosie didn't help him. She didn't try to force an interaction. She let him founder. She let him see firsthand the world he had not been a part of. He watched as she and Leo shared private jokes, as she knew exactly how to soothe him after he tripped, as he ran to her for every question and comfort. Jonathan was an outsider, a satellite orbiting their warm, complete world. He spent most of the 2 hours walking a few paces behind them, the silence a chasm between them. But he showed up the next Saturday, and the one after that. He stopped bringing expensive gifts and started bringing a coffee for Rosie and a small fruit cup for Leo. He learned to stop trying to force his way in and just be present. He learned to watch. He learned that Leo hated loud noises, that he was fascinated by earthworms, and that when he was truly happy, he would hum a little, tuneless song. His life outside of those Saturdays was a controlled demolition. He resigned from the board of Davenport Industries, causing a stock plunge and a media firestorm. He put the penthouse on the market and moved into a comfortable but far from ostentatious brownstone in Rosie's own Brooklyn neighborhood. He ignored the furious, then pleading, then finally silent calls from his father. He settled a quiet but substantial severance with Genevieve, who disappeared from the society pages overnight. With Finn's help, he established the Leo Flynn Foundation, a name that was both an apology and a promise, and began the meticulous work of funding grassroots children's charities. One rainy Saturday, the park was not an option. He appeared at Rosie's door at 10 a.m., as instructed. She let him in with a hesitant sigh. Her apartment was bright and filled with plants, a stark contrast to the cold, minimalist spaces he had always inhabited. Leo was building a fort out of cushions in the living room. "I was wrong about you," she said abruptly as she poured him a cup of coffee. Jonathan looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "That day in the restaurant," she said, not looking at him, busying herself with the coffee mugs. "I called you a coward, and you were, but I never thought you were capable of changing, of this." She gestured vaguely around her, meaning his presence, his consistency, his quiet effort. "I'm not doing it for praise, Rosie," he said softly. "I know," she replied. "That's why it means something." That day, something shifted. As Jonathan sat on the floor, helping Leo arrange the cushions for his fort, the boy turned to him and said, "Push it, Johnny." It was the first time Leo had addressed him directly with a command, a sign of acceptance into his play. Jonathan's heart swelled. He pushed the cushion, and Leo giggled. Later, as Rosie read Leo a story before his nap, Jonathan stayed, sitting quietly in an armchair, simply being in the same room, a part of the domestic peace. He began volunteering for Verdant Hope. At first, the other volunteers, community members, students, retired folks, were suspicious of the infamous ex-CEO. But Jonathan came to work. He hauled bags of soil, built retaining walls, and dug in the dirt until his back ached, and his hands, once soft from years of paperwork, became calloused. He never spoke of his donation, he just did the work. He listened as Rosie instructed her teams, her passion and expertise evident in every word. He was seeing the woman she had become, not just the girl he had lost, and his admiration for her grew into a profound, humbling respect. The true turning point came on a crisp autumn evening, nearly a year after the press conference. He had stayed late at a Verdant Hope project site at a women's shelter, helping Rosie and her team finish planting a new vegetable garden. As everyone else packed up, the two of them sat on a newly built bench, watching the sunset paint the sky over the city. "Thank you for today," she said. "We wouldn't have finished without you." "It's the best work I've ever done," he replied, and he meant it. They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment before Rosie spoke again, her voice soft and heavy with memory. "I almost lost him, you know." Jonathan turned to her, confused. "What?" "When I was 7 months pregnant," she said, her gaze distant. "I got a bad flu. I was so sick and so alone. I ended up in the emergency room at a city hospital. My fever was dangerously high. I remember lying there, terrified, holding my stomach and just praying he would be okay. The whole time, all I could think was, he needs his father. I almost called you." Jonathan felt the air leave his body. He pictured her, sick, terrified, and utterly alone, while he was probably in a boardroom in another country, making money, living the lie. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest. "Rosie, I'm so sorry," he choked out, the words pathetically inadequate. She finally turned to look at him, and for the first time in years, her eyes were not filled with ice or guarded professionalism, but with a shared profound sadness. "I know you are, Jonathan," she said. "I know that now." She didn't move closer. She didn't take his hand. But she had shared her deepest scar with him. She had led him into the truest, most painful part of her story. It was an act of trust more intimate than any touch. He looked at this incredible woman, her face illuminated by the soft twilight. He had started this journey hoping to get his family back. He realized now that wasn't the goal. The goal was to heal the wounds he had caused, to build something new and honest from the rubble of the past. The goal was to be the man that she and their son deserved. "Can I walk you home?" he asked. Rosie smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Yes, Jonathan, you can." As they walked through the darkening Brooklyn streets, a comfortable distance between them, Jonathan knew his journey was far from over. There was no guarantee they would ever rekindle what they once had. But for the first time, the road ahead didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a privilege. It was an unpaved road, but for the first time, they were walking on it together. The chill of late autumn had settled over the city, and with it came the holiday season. It was a time that for 3 years, Jonathan had associated with sterile corporate parties and the hollow exchange of expensive, meaningless gifts. This year was different. He was in Rosie's warm, brightly lit kitchen, the air thick with the scent of cinnamon and ginger. On the table between them sat a half-decorated gingerbread house, and Leo, now almost 4, was meticulously applying icing to a gumdrop with the focus of a master surgeon. Their Saturdays had long since bled into other days of the week, a shared dinner on a Tuesday, a trip to the farmer's market on a Sunday. The rhythm of their lives was slowly, carefully braiding together. They had never talked about it. It had simply happened, an unspoken tide pulling them closer. "More stars, Daddy," Leo demanded, pointing a sticky finger at a small bowl of silver sugar pearls. The word still sent a jolt of warmth through Jonathan every time he heard it. It had happened 3 months prior, on a perfectly ordinary afternoon in the park. Leo had stumbled, and instead of crying out for his mom, he had turned and yelled, "Daddy, catch!" Jonathan had caught him, and in that moment had felt the last broken piece of his heart click back into place. He looked at Rosie now, her face soft in the warm light, a smudge of flour on her cheek. She met his gaze and smiled, a real, unguarded smile that made him feel like he could finally breathe. "You know," she said, her voice quiet and thoughtful as she straightened a crooked candy cane on the roof, "my board is asking about the foundation, about its founder." Jonathan's hand stilled. "What are you telling them?" "I tell them he's a man who understands that rebuilding takes time," she said, her eyes holding his. "That he's more interested in laying a new foundation than talking about the old one." It was her way of telling him she saw him, the man he was now, not the ghost of the man he had been. He had spent so long trying to atone for the past, but her words gave him permission to finally look toward the future. "Rosie," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "What are we doing?" Before she could answer, Leo looked up at them, his expression serious. "Is Daddy staying for the movie tonight?" he asked his mom, then looked at Jonathan. "Are you sleeping over? My fort has room." The innocent question hung in the air, filled with a child's simple desire for his family to be whole. Jonathan looked at Rosie, deferring to her completely. This was her home, her life, her decision. He would accept whatever she chose. Rosie reached across the table and gently wiped the flour from her cheek with the back of her hand. She then reached out and laid her hand over Jonathan's, her touch sending a current of warmth through him. "Yes, Leo," she said, her gaze locked with Jonathan's. "Daddy is staying." Then speaking to Jonathan, her voice was soft but clear, filled with a certainty that had been absent for so long. I think it's time you came home." Jonathan's journey was far from over. Stripping himself of his corporate title and fortune, he started again, not with money, but with purpose. He spent the next year not trying to win Rosie back, but trying to become a man worthy of being Leo's father. He volunteered at her gardens, his manicured hands learning the feel of soil and hard work. He spent Saturdays building towers with blue blocks, learning the sound of his son's laughter, and earning his trust one patient moment at a time. The story of Jonathan and Rosie isn't a fairy tale of instant forgiveness. It's a real, raw story about the devastating power of lies and the quiet, difficult path to redemption. It shows that sometimes the greatest wealth isn't found in a boardroom, but in a second chance. What do you think? Can a betrayal that deep ever be truly forgiven? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please give it a like. Share it with someone who loves a powerful drama. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will stay with you long after you finish watching.